Okay, and now I'm going to share my screens. Hold on one sec. Okay, does anyone see my screen? Should be a PowerPoint.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, it's up there.
All right. Well, thank you guys, and again, apologize for the difficulties. But yeah, this is an example why you always test things before you need them. Um, I did test it, but obviously I didn't do a thorough job because I didn't test my mic. But anyways, let it be a lesson. Let my mistake be a lesson to you guys. So I'm gonna go through just 4 items, and they're called tech evaluation, which is a process, cost versus price, redundancy, and risk. Those last 3 are all concepts. So the tech evaluation is important. You're going to use the tech evaluation in your week 5 exercise. It's not complicated. Excuse me, I got a bit of a cold, so my voice sounds funny. But it's not a complicated thing, but I just want you to pay attention, and I've really simplified it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a concept of redundancy. Okay, I know everyone here has heard the word, so I'm not going to I'm going to assume that, but let's go a little. What does it actually mean? Actually, let's look at this this diagram. This diagram of a plane is a great example of redundancy. In this plane, there's actually 3 different ways to control the different parts of the plane. I know we got some pilots here, so they can maybe chime in and help me out. But essentially, redundancy means that we have more than one independent means for accomplishing a given function. The key points are more than one and independent, right? So as you can see, the diagram shows 2 separate hydraulic lines to control the rudder. All right, so if one hydraulic line goes down, then they can go to the other one. And they might even have a digital system, so there might be triplicate redundancy. So double redundancy would mean that there's 2 ways, triplicate means 3 ways, and so on and so forth. You got to think to yourself, would it be smart to kind of put the hydraulic lines, far away from each other? Because if there's a fire in one area, it might cut through both of them. So that's definitely a consideration. But again, redundancy in our context means more than one independent way of doing something. The other definition of redundancy refers to kind of something that is wasteful, that you don't need. For example, in the private sector, people are often found redundant and laid off or fired. Okay. In our business, in emergency management, in homeland security, it means something different. So let's keep that in mind. Redundancy is a function of risk. What I mean by that, when anyone says a function of, it means that the more of something, so in this case, the more risk, the more redundant. So there's a mathematical relationship between redundancy and risk. Right? So the more risk there is, the more redundancy there is. It could be the opposite, but for this case, it's, the mathematical relationship is when you increase risk, you increase redundancy. And we know that. So, what are risky things? Yeah, flying, obviously. Flying in a plane is risky. Something goes wrong, and you become a lawn dart. Not good for anybody. High risk stuff. That's why you have at least double redundancy on almost all control systems. The space shuttle is even higher risks. NASA usually has a standard of triplicate redundancy. The space shuttle has higher risk, higher redundancy. But let's always keep in mind that redundancy costs money. In a perfect world, we'd have, a very robust redundant system. But we can't always do that because we know we have budgets and we have to prioritize things. So it does cost money. It's not free. And we're going to talk about how do you get to the decision on where you implement your redundancy. And then we're also going to talk about risk in a second. And then second, resiliency. I know you guys have that in other courses, but to me, mitigation and resiliency is essentially the same exact thing. I don't really know a difference. But yeah, so resiliency is important. If you have a resilient system, oftentimes you can reduce your redundancy requirements. And again, resiliency costs money too. So, as in everything in life, there's going to be a lot of trade-offs, right? So we're going to talk about that in a sec. But let's go to risk. So risk is a very important concept. My my PhD actually was centered in risk. And it's a very simple concept that can be extremely complex at the same time. But let's break it down to the simplest formulation. And if you look at my slides, at the top I have an equation. An equation simply risk equals probability multiplied by impact. Okay, so probability is the likelihood that something's going to occur. So an asteroid falling on Washington, D.C. and destroying the whole city is not a very probable event. So in a mathematical sense, we would assign a very low number, so maybe 0.00001% chance. A giant snowstorm in D.C., shutting down the city for 2-3 days is pretty high probability. That happens with regularity every couple years. So I would say that's pretty high probability. So probability, again, is how likely is something to occur. The impact, obviously, is, okay, how bad is it when it happens? So, if we had a Category 5 hurricane hitting the coast of Alaska, the impact likely, unless it hit Anchorage or somewhere else, it would be low. I mean, not very many people live in Alaska. There's very little structures. There's a lot of forests. So the impact would be low. Let's look at Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Sandy actually was a tropical storm when it hit New York. It was a very large storm and it had quite a significant storm surge, but it was not categorized as a hurricane when it hit New York. However, New York City metropolitan area has upwards of 30 million people, and that's a lot of people. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of infrastructure. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of stuff generally inside that area. So it was not a huge storm, but it had a high impact. It made national news. It closed the stock market. It affected prices of different commodities all over the world. So yeah, it was a high impact event. So again, when you think of impact, don't think of the strength of the storm or the magnitude of the earthquake or so on and so forth. Yes, that is important, but again, a giant storm hitting in an unpopulated area has very little impact, right? So impact is a function of, the strength of the disaster, of the hazard, if you will, or if it's a technological thing, the scope of it. But impact is important to understand as not simply a function of the strength of the hazard. It involves more than that. Okay, moving on. So again, let me back up one sec. So the question I introduced earlier is, okay, you need redundancy and stuff, but you have a limited budget. How do you do it? Okay, so I offer that a good way to do it is using a risk framework. Okay, so what I'm showing you now is this risk framework. I talked about probability and impact. And this is going to help you decide a couple things on where you should focus your resources, your effort, and really what you should focus on and what's important. So the first thing you do is you start with a blank chart like this. This is called a quad chart. Again, impact on the x-axis, probability of occurrence on the y-axis. So think of it like that, and just notice there's 4 quadrants. So okay, let's do a couple of examples. I talked about the giant asteroid. If a giant asteroid hit Washington, D.C., it could wipe out life on the face of the planet if it's big enough. Okay, so I would definitely consider that a high impact event. It's extremely low probability. So if you notice, it's the bottom right corner of this chart. hurricane, a DC thunderstorm. You know, we had one yesterday. We have probably like 50 a year. The city does not stop. So it's a high probability event. It happens all the time, but it is low impact. You know, we get some rain. We might get some localized flooding, but, you know, we don't cancel work. We don't cancel school. We don't do too much when it's thunderstorm. We might stay indoors, but nothing that impacts our lives too much. Okay, let's go to a Florida hurricane, a San Francisco earthquake. Florida is a hurricane magnet, and San Francisco is built right upon one of the largest fault lines in the world. So yes, we know that Florida is going to get hit with a hurricane regularly because of where it is and the amount of coastline it has and so on, and historical data. San Francisco, we know, again, through the geologic record and historical record, we get on average a large large earthquake every 1 to 500 years. So we know that these things are probably going to occur, and also the impact's going to be high. So we plot these here in the upper right quadrant. The last example, the probability of occurrence of an Arctic blast is pretty low. We get one maybe every few years, and again, impact is pretty low, you know, other than maybe staying indoors a little more and delaying some errands. We don't let, you know, cold weather really impact our day-to-day life. You know, work goes on, life goes on, and so on and so forth. We adjust. So again, Arctic blast, you can consider that a low impact, low probability event. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. Okay, so the question remains is, you know, I have a limited budget. I need redundancy. How do I prioritize? How do I decide where I spend my money? Okay, so if you've gone through this risk framework, then you should have a good idea of what quadrant, you know, whatever you're worried about. If it's building, you know, a warning system, you know, look in your upper right quadrant. That's a high impact, high probability event. So that's where you really want to focus your resources and your efforts, right? I mean, that's the most likely to happen, and if it happens, it's going to be really bad, right? So that's clear. The other ones, it gets a little tricky. High impact, low probability events, also called as black swan events. It's not a reading for this class, but I definitely recommend it. Black swan events, it was coined not too long ago, but it basically refers to very low probability but high impact events, things that were not on our radar that happened. The Haiti earthquake is an example. No one really paid too much attention to earthquakes in Haiti. We worried about storms, hurricanes, flooding, famine, all that stuff. But, you know, we knew at some level, but we didn't actively prepare for an earthquake in Haiti. But that happened, and it was huge. So that was a black swan event. Again, if you want to understand a black swan event, definitely just Google it and start with the Wikipedia page. But it's a very interesting topic that we could go a whole class just about these events. Okay, so low impact, low probability. This, to me, is a waste of resources. Why are you going to bother with something that's not likely to happen, but even if it happens, not much is going to happen? So yeah, that's pretty clear. Don't spend too much time in this quadrant. Then your next quadrant up, your high probability but low impact. You know, this is routine stuff, but, you know, routine stuff is important. You know, why do DC thunderstorms not impact our daily life? Because we've spent money on a proper stormwater drainage system. You know, our cars are weatherproofed and so on and so forth. So we've done a lot of little things to make us capable of dealing with these low impact, high probability events that are routine. So again, just to kind of recap, obviously this top right quadrants are most important. And then, you know, second I would say is a toss-up between our routine quadrant and our black swan quadrant. If I had to spend the money, I would spend the money most on this routine quadrant versus the black swan events. Again, the nature of a black swan events, it's hard to predict. So if you plan for something that's hard to predict, you're likely to miss the mark. So anyways, again, this is a risk framework. This can be used in almost anything in life. People get PhDs in basically doing fancy risk frameworks like this and plotting different things. But you can plot almost anything on a quad chart like this. So anytime you're in a situation where you need to decide resources, this is definitely one way to go. So just keep this in mind as we move on. The next thing, okay, following along our train of thought, we first said, okay, how, what redundancy do we need? Then I offered that, if you use a risk framework, you can prioritize stuff and focus on what's important. And then kind of the last piece of that is, okay, we need some technology to support this. We need radios to communicate. We need all types of stuff to help us do our jobs. So how do you go about actually, deciding what piece of technology or what system to use? There's a process called technology evaluation, or that's a very generalized process, and I've simplified it even more. But the key thing is you don't start with the solution. You never say, hey, these fancy radios that I just bought, they're the best thing, on the market. Let's just get them and then we'll figure out how to use them. No, you never start with the solution. Always start with the problem. The problem is we need to communicate with our guys in the field 24/7 instantly. That's our problem. Okay, what are our objectives of that? Okay, like I said, we at 24/7. We have to communicate over a distance of 500 kilometers with 100% reliability, so on and so forth. So we listed some objectives. Objectives are what are important to us. That instant communications is important. That range of 500 kilometers is important. So we've done that. Then the next thing we need to do is do some criteria weighting, which I'm going to get to in a sec. But just hold that thought. Again, this process of technology evaluation, it should be an objective process, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But again, when you start with a solution and you start with something that you think will work, you're going to be biased towards fitting everything into that solution, and that's not a very good idea. There are other methods to do this. There's Delphi, there's expert opinion elicitation, there's an independent analysis. So there's all different ways to get to this. But I'm just offering this technology evaluation as a real simple way to make decisions on spending money. So I'm going to go to this spreadsheet right here. So it's a real simple spreadsheet. Again, we're ranking 3 different technologies. I'm just calling it 1, 2, and 3. And my criteria, which is really my objectives, reliability, cost, training requirements, maintenance, and compatibility. So if you look at the weights, I got 40% from compatibility, maintenance 20, cost is 10. So clearly the cost is not that important because I only gave it 10% weight. And I gave my compatibility 40%. So right, the point of this process is you weight your criteria, and what that means is you define how important that criteria is. So in this example, our compatibilities are most important, and reliability and cost are least important, and that's reflective of the weight that they've been given. This spreadsheet, in general, all the weights should equal 100 or 1 or 100%. And then the next thing what you do is you rank your technologies. Okay, you go through your specifications of you pick 3 different radios and you look at your range. You look at how much training requirement and you put a number here. For example, here it's 1 through 10. And then you go to your second technology and you rank them and your third and so on. That's an important point. It's simple, but the key point is it shouldn't just be one person. If it's just one person, that's not a good thing. It really should be multiple people doing that. As many people as possible and as many objective people as possible. Doing it with one person is not good. Anytime you have one data point, it's not very reliable. The more data points you add, the more reliable of an answer you're going to get in general, and the closer you are to a kind of an average or consensus type answer you're going to get. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, a communication technology evaluation. It's a simple process. Again, you define your objective, you define your criteria, you weight your criteria, then you rank them by multiple people, and then you look at your total score. So in this example, clearly Technology 2 had the highest score, and it wins. Okay, so the question is, why would I go through all this? Well, and the answer to me is this, is everyone's got a boss, right? So at some point, you're going to have to convince somebody that they need to spend this money. You're going to have to get approval. When you go into the boss's office and say, hey, I found these fancy radios online and they look really cool, I'm going to buy them. If I'm the boss, I'm gonna shut you down right there and say, you looked at only one piece of technology, and that's not acceptable. So why do this? Number one, you're looking at multiple pieces of technology. Two, you're having some independence and objectivity. And three, you have some there's some math behind it that you can show objectively that the ranking is higher. So if you go into your boss's office with a spreadsheet like this and say, hey, we surveyed 25 people in the field. We looked at 3 different technologies. We were very careful in determining our criteria and our weights. And our technology 2 was ranked the highest. And my personal feeling is that I concur with that. So I wholeheartedly rank technology 2. That is a much better argument to make. That'll build confidence, and the boss is more likely to say yes to it. And again, your boss could be a person, it could be a board, it could be Congress, it could be a state legislator, whoever. But again, you always got to keep in mind that at the end of the day, you got to convince someone to spend this money. And you want to have as solid of an argument as possible, and you want to have a very credible argument that looks independent and looks like it's very rigorous and well done. So that is communication technology evaluation. The last thing, let me just see what time it is. Okay, we got some time. The last thing that, that's my wrong slide, sorry, is one more concept, and that's cost versus price, okay? And again, look at this spreadsheet. Cost is one of my criteria, right? So in an economic sense, cost is the sum of all our inputs. So the cost to making a vehicle is how much you got to pay the workers, how much you got to pay, all the parts, how much it costs to assembly, and so on. The price in the economic sense is how much the customer is going to pay. And in general, the price is going to be above cost, right? A Ford Explorer costs $30,000 to build, but they sell it for $45,000, right? $45,000 is the price. Okay, so in a technology sense, it's slightly different. Okay, cost is the sticker price, right? Cost is I bought my iPhone for $700, or I bought my fancy radio for $700, including tax and everything, right? The price includes everything on top of that, right? I got this fancy radios, but now I need to train all my staff. I need to have an implementation plan. I need to build out a help desk. I have to do regular maintenance, and then when they're done, I have to dispose of them, in a certified hazardous material landfill, which costs money. So, okay, I bought these radios for $700, but I actually needed to spend roughly $1,500 per radio on all these other things. So always keep in mind that when you do an evaluation or discuss technology, requirements, purchase, acquisition, always differentiate between the cost and the price in the technology sense, right? If you only budget and you only plan for the sticker price, you are going to shortchange yourself, and again, it's going to hurt you in the end because at some point you're going to have to ask for more money. So always remember that the price is more than cost. So that's all I have for the lecture. But again, a couple things. One is, I structured that lecture, in kind of a logical sense, in that, redundancy is important. We know that, but we don't know where to build our redundancy. Okay, let's use risk. Risk can tell us, okay, where to focus our efforts, where to build our redundancy, where to spend money. Okay, now you have to decide, okay, how do I spend that money? So now, a technology evaluation is just a really good, simple process to do that. You can modify it any way you want. You can make it more complex, simplified, but the point is it's structured, it's objective, and it has, multiple people, weighing in on it. No, it's not just one person. So that's all I had. And again, I apologize. I talked a little fast to make up time, but I just wanted to open it up to any questions. First about the lecture, and then second about the course. So let's just open it up. And again, there's no text, so if you want to ask a question, just jump on. Unmute. Don't forget to unmute your mic.
What was your formula in your dissertation that you used to calculate the risk factors?
What the formulas?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We'd have to have a whole separate discussion on that, but at the end of the day, it was simply probability and impact. What I did is I basically broke up impact into about 20 different categories. So the impact really dependent on, I built a model on predicting how many houses you would have to rebuild after disaster. So it would depend on the strength of the storm, what area it hit, the poverty level, the income level, all types of these factors were incorporated into impact. So yeah, there's a lot of calculations in there. There's not one single equation. And essentially the computer builds the equation for you through a regression analysis. That is a way, it's a fancier way to determine what factors are important. But that's definitely a much more complex thing that we can talk about one-on-one. We're not going to get into this class, but it's definitely another way to determine risk. Okay, anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, last call for questions on the lecture. Then let's any questions about the class? I'll say a couple things. Okay, week 5 starts tonight. You have this communication technology evaluation and exercise. So essentially what I'm asking you to do is I give you a scenario and I tell you got to buy some equipment and you got to go through this process. And there's some other things involved. But the assignment will be available tonight, so just read through it. And it's a group exercise, but the groups are 2 people, or there's going to be one group of 3. But you're going to be assigned a partner, and you're going to have to do your technology evaluation, and you're going to have to share it with your partner and give your partner feedback. It's all written in the exercise sheet. There's not going to be, let me just double check. I don't think we have a discussion this week, except for the discussion you should be having. Yeah, so there's no main discussion, but you are required to have a discussion with your partner that I will assign. So again, no main discussion, and it's just really the readings this week and the exercise. Then the week after that's your midterm. I'll say this, I'm not big on tests. The university has not a strict requirement, but an encouragement to use exams. So I think the exam's already posted. I might make some changes, but it's going to be short essay, and I'm just looking for good writing and some concepts that we talked about in class already. It's your chance to show me that you've actually read and absorbed the material. So exam is on in 2 weeks, week 6. I make it due on Saturday night because there's no real midterm, spring break or anything of that, especially in the summer. So at least you get 3 days where you don't have to think about school. So I make it due. You get it Tuesday night, and it's due on Saturday night. And then, enjoy Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Don't think about school at all. You get a nice 3-day break, and then we got 6 more weeks. So, again, week 5, exercise and readings, no main discussion. And week 6 is your midterm, and that's all you have for week 6. So, I'm going to open it up to questions. And if there's no questions, we're just going to finish. I'm going to wish you guys all a good night. And again, thanks for bearing with me with this, with these with these issues on Hangouts.
Do we have current events?
I don't know. I haven't decided. So in all my previous classes, I'd have a very structured current events weekly, but I don't know. We might have it, and so I started that email thread. So if anyone else wants to start something, they can definitely use the email thread we use for the exercise or other. But I know there's some reference about current events as part of your participation grade. But because I'm not making a requirement, I'm just not going to evaluate it for your grade in general. Obviously, it's going to be a bonus to you if I notice that you are commenting on current events and you are participating. That's definitely a bonus. But I'll say this: I'm not going to take away any. I'm not going to consider it a negative if you don't participate.
Okay. And I had a question for the group project. For the sheet that I downloaded, I was just wondering about the dates. Are the topic due? Is that still end of week 6? The outline, the end of week 8, and then the final paper, it just has April 20th and the 21st.
Yes. Yeah, that is correct. Let me just take a look at what I wrote. Yeah, so the paper is due on the 20th, and then it'll be our last live session, but on the 21st and the 22nd, and again, if the dates don't work up, we can make adjustments, but that's the plan right now, is a short 20-minute brief on your project. I don't require slides. If you want to do slides, great, but it's just your chance to brief me, and I actually do invite other people too on the line. So me or other people to brief us on what you've written. It's not an opportunity to just read word for word or anything like that. We'll all have read everything, but it's more just to simulate kind of a work briefing. So the paper's due on the 20th, and then the 21st and the 22nd are the presentations. So at the end of week 6, which is that is incorrect. Yeah, those dates are wrong. So now I see what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I was still on last semester, so I apologize. Let me fix those, fix the dates, but it is end of week 6.
Okay.
And then week 8, and then the presentations are basically the last 2 days of class. But I'll fix that now and get you the correct dates. So I apologize.
Oh, no problem. And my other question was, I know you said the midterm. Will you make that available a little bit early, or will it just begin next week?
I think it might even be available now, but I'll make it available by tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Wait, tomorrow. Give me a couple of days, but within the next 2 days, I will make it available. So yeah, if you want to start it early, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And let me say one other thing. So at the end of week 6, I just want one person from your group to email me. Everyone should be CC'd, but just email me. And all I'm looking for is really like a couple sentences on what your topic is and why you find it interesting or relevant or something. Some kind of reason why you picked it. You don't need to provide a lengthy anything too formal. If you want to, and get a head start on your paper, go for it. But I'm really just looking for an email with a couple lines, and I'll respond probably within a day at least, and either approve it or tell you we need to kind of make some changes. But in the guidance, I said don't just give me an email that says, hey, we want to look at this because it's a cool it's a cool gadget, that I can guarantee that that's not going to be approved. You have to go through that. Use the logic that I've been presenting in this in the lecture today. Start with a problem and say, hey, we want to use this is our problem. We're going to evaluate these technologies to see if they will address the problem. Don't come to me and just say this is what we want to do because it's a cool gadget. So.
I
have a question. This is Ray Marlin. Do you still do you have a list of topics that if we don't come up with one?
Yes,
You
yeah,
can
and
provide.
I did see your email. I haven't responded, but I will. If any group wants, I do have a list, so I will respond over email. But I can I can say a couple things now. It, the well, okay, I actually want to save it because I haven't introduced this topic, but the idea of mesh networking in communications is hugely important, and you'll get some more info via an announcement on that really soon. But looking at how mesh networking is going to impact the field of emergency management is going to be hugely significant in the next couple of years, because mesh networking is basically an ability to communicate when everything else fails. We can still do that. So that's one. Robotics and drones are a very popular topic. Again, you'd want to be a little more specific. Just saying, we want to look at drones and disasters. That's not very. That wouldn't be approved. I mean, you'd have to look at something. For example, how do you conduct that? Is there a better way to conduct disaster assessments with flying robots? Is a good example. And then kind of the third route is a case study. You don't have to do a technology evaluation or anything like that. If there's an interesting disaster or an interesting or something in the Homeland Security realm that you want to look at, you can do that. For example, sorry, the border wall has been a hot topic. A good idea might be to look at the history of technology that we or either this country or someone else has used in securing their borders and how that's changed over time. That's kind of a historical case study. You could do also, you could look into the future and say, hey, the problem is we need to secure a border. How are we going to do it? Clearly building a wall is not a very smart, wise, or feasible solution. So, obviously technology has to be, used. So, something of that nature might work too. But yeah, I will, Ray Marlin, I will send you guys a list specifically because you guys, group one asked.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions? If anyone, it's Pat. We're 5 minutes past. So if anyone wants to drop off, go ahead. I'm gonna stay on for questions for a good 5-10 minutes at least, or however long it needs to be. So I want to wish everyone a good night. Thank you for bearing with me. And if you want to stay on and ask questions, I'll be here.
Hi, this is Curfew Robinson. I got on a little late. Just want to make sure.
Okay. Yeah. I did. Yeah.
Noted that.
Yeah, I did. How late were you, I guess? Or what?
Well, I'm an hour behind. I got on at 7:13
Okay.
in the area I am.
Yeah, so actually we started like 10 minutes late, so I think you didn't miss much at all.
Okay.
And also there will be a recording of this, so if you do want to fill in that gap, you can do that.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.